morning, Dr. Thompson, or good afternoon to you.
Good morning, Mr. Lester. How are you?
I am very well. Christ is risen.
He is truly risen.
Yeah, it's been an interesting weekend. It's been an interesting week before that. The Triduum always strikes me as ever new and ever something to experience. It's really fantastic to have gone through it and be on the other side now. So I sang at Tenebrae, and we attended services on Friday, and then on Saturday vigil, Sunday morning. It was quite delightful. And I found out all sorts of neat trinkets and ideas and things about Tolkien along the way too, which I'm eager to you and to the studio audience. I know that we were going to meet last Friday, I think it was before Good Friday, which was Annunciation, if I remember right. And wanted to point out to those that don't know that that's also the date of the throwing the ring into the fire, the Feast of the Annunciation. Tolkien was always very specific in what he wanted the dates of his events to fall upon. So
the throwing of the ring into the fire was the Annunciation, and if I'm not mistaken, that's also traditionally held to be, in fact, the calendar date of Good Friday, isn't it?
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. So it's a dual power day, I suppose you say.
Yeah, it's a dual power day, triple power day if we include the secondary world of Middle Earth.
A triple power day.
That's right.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I think his vision extended so far as to see those connections and to see why the Christian idiom, the Christian message, was such a, for lack of a better word, a godsend, right? How powerful that was in this defeat of the powers that were against us as humans.
Yeah,
neat to see it. And I think, again, we have the what is it? The event of the Good Friday just last week, which really signifies the birth of the church. It's the creation of the Christian church there. So the Good Friday and then the resurrection on Easter Sunday. So that's kind of strange. I had a revelation which I've been mulling over. I was just thinking of something because it's what I do. I think of things. And I was thinking about the idea of the Logos in the ancient world. And most people are unfamiliar with the Logos these days. So they may have heard of Plato's forms or things like that. But the Logos is basically it's an idea of mathematics governing everything that exists. This pattern of the world that then later is interpreted to be the Christ himself. In John's Gospel, in the beginning was the word Logos. But the ancient world saw the Logos as this immutable pattern, and no matter what you did, you were going to be part of that pattern. And so really there was a problem between fate, as we call it now, and free will, that the fatedness Logos meant that no matter what you did, you're going to be fit into that pattern. So really your individuality and your free will were meaningless to a certain degree. And so though it was beautiful and it was wonderful, it was also a little bit demoralizing, I suppose you could say.
And there's not the existence of the person. The human exists, but the person as such doesn't exist, or at least a human person doesn't exist in that kind of system, then, does it?
Yeah, that's the terminology, is the person, the personhood, the individual person. Now, Cameron Thompson or William Lasseter don't matter. Just we are nodes upon that tremendous flower of life. But then when the baptism of the Logos occurs, which is, to put it another way, the incarnation, the Logos is a conscious being that takes form and walks among us because he loved us, because we were worthy of love. That was a monumental event, changed the course of human history. And in some ways, I think one could say, whether you believe that or whether you think that's historically true, in some ways is superfluous, because you have to acknowledge that it was an event, whatever that event was, that absolutely vision as humans of what we are.
Well, absolutely right. I mean, there's this huge, there's a mass cultural consciousness shift, a shift in the way that we think about what's possible, the way that we think about individual substances of human nature, these individual organisms running around that we now call persons. I mean, that idea, with all that's loaded into it today, didn't really, I mean, only really came out of conversations around the nature of the incarnation. And so whether or not you accept the incarnation as historical fact, you have to acknowledge, at least historically, the mythical, if you will, the mythical significance of it.
Yeah, the power of it. And as Guardini says in that great quotation, a symbol, an idea, a symbol is as real as a chemical or a bodily organ. It is something which changes a person when you accept the thing. And then, of course, there's belief. There's the belief that this is true, that this really occurred. And that is an extra power to it. It motivates people to do all sorts of tremendous things.
Absolutely. And because not only the incarnation, but that the Logos actually became flesh is a scandalous enough sort of idea. But that then the Logos submitted to death and entered into Hades, going into the underworld, undergoing the process of mortality, and by that exploding mortality from the inside, and conquering death, and then rising from death again. That it should have the power to rise from death. That's easy to understand. It's immortal, it's immutable, it's eternal, it's the Logos. But that it was able to possibly to go to die, that the Logos died and rose again, gives a whole different kind of orientation towards how we think about death and what death is or can be, or any smaller gradation of death, any other inkling or mortality, the woundedness, suffering, pain, disasters, all of these things then have been imbued with the Logos too, not just as instrumental events, but have become part of God. And thus channels. They can become channels of the divine.
Yeah, you know, there are two passages in the Passion that have always stuck with me, even since I was a young guy. And you know, Abraham Lincoln used to walk around with Shakespeare and the King James Bible when he went on his lawyer route, and that was all he ever read. And I'm thinking I would go around with the Bible and Tolkien. Those would be my two tomes that I carry with me. You know, when you read the Bible, you read the passages, and there are two passages that have just stuck with me in that Passion. One is where Christ on the cross says, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," and my God, why have you abandoned me? It's always struck me as just this peculiar piece. But von Balthasar, I remember Ernst von Balthasar wrote about this extensively. And I think he got in hot water about it too, because I think he made the claim that at that point, the Christ was separate from the God. There was a moment where he experienced the separation that humans feel from the divine, this doubt or just emptiness. And that he wasn't just faking. This wasn't like some kind of play or drama that he was acting out. There was a moment when he really felt this abandonment. And that passage was that's powerful, because it's peculiar and powerful because you wouldn't find it anywhere in the classical world. You have images of the rest of God, or you have images of the God that gets torn apart and reconstituted. What you don't have is you don't have images of the God saying, "Where is the God?" That's really
crazy
weird.
God.
It's weird.
Yeah,
but the other,
you know, I was gonna say that's something that you know, the sort of unconventional philosopher of our day, Slavoj Žižek, you know, notably atheist guy, you know, whatever, but he talks about these. He's always making references to the Gospels and various things, and you know how he's got insights into it and whatnot. But it's an interesting observation he made. He's like, you've got, you know, here's a real revolution. This is more revolutionary than anything Marx could come up with, of a God who himself becomes an atheist. Like God himself becomes an atheist for a brief moment, and that's somebody that we can identify because he's entered into the depths of of the abyss, and staring up from the abyss, even if temporarily, he's even entered into there. That's a radical kind of claim.
That is a radical claim. I like Zizek. He's very intriguing and I think profound as a thinker. He is. I don't know if he's a professed atheist or if he's an agnostic.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't think he would make that kind of commitment because he's too honest for that.
All right. But that he's right in that moment that Christ has a moment, not where he just denies God, but where he experiences the complete just loss of God, which is just a stunning concept to me. It's something you would never find in the ancient world, is what I'm saying. There's moments in
Yeah,
the gospel
right.
you never find in the ancient world images. And that's really, I mean, sure, you find images of God torn up, or you find images of God walking among humans. But there's always a sense that this is a God and will stay a God, and it's not going to change. That's not going to change.
Yeah, that's what you mentioned, von Balthasar, on that point, that God became separated, or Christ separated from the Godhead in some way.
Yeah, right. That Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And the other point, it'll come back to me when I don't need it. But this is why I think that Tolkien was so keen on bringing these images into his work. But startlingly, he doesn't bring Christian images into his work. And that's kind of strange to me too. Why didn't Tolkien there's not much mention in Tolkien of God or gods or of a redeemer. There's no mention, obviously, of the Christ in our world or any of that, because it's a secondary world. And yet, we refer to Tolkien almost as though he were gospel, and other people see him as profoundly influential over their spiritual lives and think in a Christian sense. I don't know.
Why shouldn't he be? He was. I mean, in some of the letters he talks about writing his world is very intentionally pre-Christian, not non-Christian, because the whole premise for Middle Earth, right, is that it's our world a very, very long time ago in a galaxy not so far away.
Yeah, and it's almost as though the names they have for the gods and for the spiritual powers are just other names for the same thing.
Right, and because what he's able to do, and this is what I think people find very compelling about Tolkien's world, especially when you really delve into the Silmarillion, you get a sense of what are the supernatural, the divinities, the pantheon that exists in this world of Middle Earth, and what are the roles that they play. When you come to understand that within this secondary world, you start to be able to get a glimpse of what for instance, the medieval Christian like the eyes with which they see the world. Because for the ancients, for the early Christians, for Christians, I mean, not so early, even in our own day, who just don't happen to have lived through the sort of the disenchantment of the modern West. I'm thinking in particular some Ethiopian Christians that I know, or Eritrean, in fact, but part of the Tewahedo Church, who their world is still very much enchanted with spirits, and the powers of the universe isn't just sort of this Aristotelian mathematical formula, but the sun, the moon, and the stars, the wind, this mountain, that river, are really personal beings imbued with agency that are really alive. And like that, entering into this secondary world of Middle Earth, we're able to, for a moment, glimpse what a traditional person actually, in our world, a Christian, traditional person who's a Christian, views our world as in a pre-modern or non-modern way.
That's a really good point. I've often thought about this when studying history. The motives for actions in the ancient world are sometimes incomprehensible unless you think like they thought, and unless you see the world in that charged way. If you don't account for their sense of spirituality, some things they do as a people are just, what on earth? The bog people in the Celtic world, that would be strangled and tossed into the bogs, apparently went willingly to do it. Like, they were willingly strangled and put into what? The Inca princesses who would go up on the mountain, electrocuted by lightning bolts. They did it willingly. They sat there with a piece of tin on their head, waiting to be electrocuted for the gods. The fact that the Spartans wouldn't fight on certain days because of the holy days.
Right.
What? You've got the Persians descending on you, buddy. What the heck? But unless you see it as symbolic, as religion, as electrically charged, makes no sense at all. No sense.
That's exactly right. Electrically charged. Because they live in a different world. Yeah. They live in a different world. In fact, there's geopolitical conflicts of our own within our own lifetime, anyway, that the real crux of the matter comes between the fact that you've got peoples that are living in two different worlds, and that's why they can't understand each other. And the one side is incomprehensible to the other.
Yeah.
Not because they're crazy, but because they literally live in a different world. We share the same environment, but a radically different world.
Radically different world, a different worldview. Yeah. Yeah. And so with Tolkien's work, you do get a sense that this is probably how people dealt with the world in general. They weren't stupid.
Yeah.
They weren't fools, but they didn't think in terms of a mechanized universe the way that we're dealing with.
No, it's full of persons.
That's why, yeah, persons. That's why I love it. I sent you that video of Tolkien responding to the question about the eagles. I think that was the best, because Tolkien was a guy. He thought like an ancient, and there are people that do that.
He did. Yeah.
You know, they still think like the ancient world did, either through study or just through nature. And Tolkien did. And so when he's asked about eagles, I'll have to, maybe I can insert the clip here or something, but he's asked about why didn't they just fly the eagles into Mordor and drop the ring into the fire, right? Helicopters.
Right.
And Tolkien must have been old when he answered this, because he's very doddering and he kind of takes his time, and he finally says, I said the same thing I will say to you. Shut up. This is so great.
Yeah.
You know, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't get it, shut up.
Shut up. I mean, you say nothing of the Mordor Air Force. I mean, the Nazgul flying around it. You know.
Mordor Air Force. Yeah, right. Yeah, and again, our punching bag of Peter Jackson, I wonder if that's sometimes why I don't like his stuff, is because he doesn't get it. He doesn't think like an ancient. You know, he thinks like a monster.
Right. And I think that's a key insight that you made, that Tolkien is able to think like an ancient through long study, through his immersion in these magic spells. That's what they are. Because remember, in Anglo-Saxon, the word spell is the word for story. A story is a magic spell. It's the same thing. And his really imbibing these magical spells, these potions that he's able to then regurgitate out, but able to recite out. He, like Snorri Sturluson, are lore masters, and both of them are like the Elrond figure, and they're able to impart lore to us, to allow us to begin to see that too, if we will, to be able to see in that same way, I should say, if we will.
Yeah. And there are those artists and thinkers and philosophers in the world today that are capable of doing that. They are seen as freaks, or seen as underground. What are they called? Cult-like, you know. And we're not talking whack jobs. We're just talking misfits in a different way. A misfit, right? An autopilot. They don't have a place necessarily where they say, "Oh, I'm part of that society." And this is okay. So I'm not intentionally making a bridge here, but this gets me to something which I've been thinking about, and just the similarities that I found between Tolkien and Dostoevsky. And I don't know whether Tolkien read Dostoevsky or not, but and I won't know until actually there's a book coming out that I really am eager to get. Let's see here. It's called Tolkien's Library, an annotated checklist by Aranzo Chili. Like, this is this is like geek level 9, maybe geek level. Yeah. Because basically it goes through and he catalogs what books were on the shelf of Tolkien, right? Like, who would care? Well, I care, right?
I would. It's good. Glad somebody went and documented that.
I mean, if, for instance, we know Tolkien had on his shelf Dante or Chaucer, we can assume that he at least glanced at those books, you know. And if, for instance, he had on his shelf Marx and Engels, we would assume that he was at least familiar with those guys.
Right.
So if he has Dostoevsky on his shelf, these guys, no art is made in a vacuum. And frequently you have men and women who read other men and women and enjoy their stuff and incorporate pieces of their art into the art that they're making.
Right.
They aren't ripping off the material. Well, sometimes they are. I mean, J.K. Rowling. But somebody just made the theory that J.K. Rowling is actually ripping off Star Wars, because the same thing happens there with the two friends loving the same girl, and it turns out
oh my goodness,
that's
a bit far-fetched.
I know,
but let's put like the Redwall series, for instance, does a great job ripping off very explicitly, like very copy and paste scenes from Lord of the Rings.
Right.
And does it in a clearly like fanboyish kind of way. It's charming. It's lovely.
Fanboy, yes. and so if we find out that Tolkien, for instance, is reading Dostoevsky or has Dostoevsky somewhere in there, well, we can assume that at least he was wrestling with the same ideas. I know Dostoevsky
Yeah,
read
that's familiar.
and responded to Nietzsche over and over again. That's a definite.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't it be possible for this linguist to have read Dostoevsky? So anyway, I'm reading through right now Dostoevsky's work, The Double. And the main character in The Double is named Goliadkin. And I probably pronounce it wrong, but Goliadkin is how they're pronouncing it in this read-through that I'm listening to. Okay. And Goliadkin he is slowly becoming a schizophrenic. He's splitting into two. So he has these conversations with himself. And they're really, I mean, listening to them, it's like listening to Smeagol Gollum. You know, it's like those conversations Gollum has with himself later on.
Right.
That's hot. Now, is it on the one hand, is it maybe just coincidental parallelism? You know, that schizophrenics operate this way, and therefore Tolkien and Dostoevsky are writing the same thing. Possibly, yeah. Is it possible that Tolkien read The Double and himself was moved by it? I'd have to find out whether Dostoevsky was even translated by that time. I don't know.
Right.
But one way or the other, one of those things is like, dang, that's so familiar, so similar. I looked and I went back and I looked up the names of Gollum just to see what I could find on it. The threads normally, people commenting on this who are smarter than I am, were saying probably unlikely that this was influenced by. And even the Russian speakers that I've accessed, they said probably not. But the name that he probably got from for Gollum is actually from Old Norse. It's as I say here in one entry, it says the Old Norse word is gull, meaning gold, and in the old manuscripts it's spelled Goll. So one inflected form could be golem, gold treasure, or something precious.
And which fits then as with the way he created the character.
Yeah,
especially because he had the name already early on before we had everything that Golem would become in the Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
It's just the connection between that and the treasure, the precious thing, which he called himself precious, hence Golem.
And I could further that in the same thread because there, you know how Anglo-Saxons always did this kenning, and they would say a phrase or describe a thing instead of calling it by its name. And one thing that they said was finger gold, which is a ring, right? So a finger gold is a ring. Well, that kind of cements the deal that maybe he was thinking this guy is synonymous with the ring. That seems
that seems to make sense. That fits the character that was created, especially the original one.
And one of the commentators was saying that it also is probably a play on words to some degree, possibly because there is a Russian word gorlo, which is like something you make in the throat, is a sound you make in the throat, gorlo.
Oh, like the word gorgle,
exactly. So it's possible he's making that play on words. But that again brought me back to the idea that if he knew that word to make a play on it, how did he know Russian? He didn't focus on it.
He wouldn't need to because that's a common. That's a common Indo-European root word.
True. Yeah.
Because we have it in English to gargle, right?
Yeah.
And so any Germanic language is going to have something that's similar to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So it's possible that he had that connection automatically there, just by accident. What I did find was interesting to me, and it kind of dispelled an idea I've had, is that there doesn't seem to have been a connection to the golem, the Jewish golem.
Yeah, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I had thought there was, and that's for years. That's how I thought the Gollum character came about, was through the connection to the Jewish golem. But apparently not. It's not something he studied. It's not something that he intended. And also, Gollum has one L, which makes kind of a difference. So it's probably not that. It's probably more either the finger goal itself or else that sound in the throat thing. One or the other.
And it's by chance, if chance you call it, that there's a connection with the Yiddish folklore creature, the golem.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah, that's more
insofar as the immediate author of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit may not have intended it, but the greater author may have already written that into the script.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
This is often the case with good literature, right? You see interliterary references unintentional on the part of either author.
Yep. Going for that, and that goes way back. I mean, I remember Socrates commenting on that in a couple of the dialogues. So yes. And so the connection to Dostoevsky might be accidental. It might be intentional. If I found out that that Dostoevsky was translated by that time, and that Tolkien read Dostoevsky, then it becomes much more possible that he was really thinking about this character. The name Goliadkin means a beggar, a tramp, a homeless person. So that is a possibility that he was playing on that word and that character more likely in Dostoevsky. But I'd have to find out a few things first. And so far, the deck is stacked against that possibility.
But only if you're looking for a one-way correspondence that it directly influenced. This, what you could be seeing, though, is two things that the Goliadkin and Tolkien's Golem actually, because, as you said, the meaning of the word, they're both, it's not a cause-effect relationship one to the other. They're both effects, or they're both traces of evidence of something is much deeper in our common European ancestral memory.
Yeah.
That there's some association with those particular syllables or those particular root vocables that is Golemy, right? And in fact, one could say that's true of all three, because Yiddish, of course, is this beautiful hybrid of languages, blending of cultures, of Germanic roots and Hebrew and Aramaic, all blending together in this tapestry, where you could have those nuances, those influences come through as well. So I think it's quite possible, just from a linguistic philological anthropological perspective.
Yeah, I could see that, and I wonder too if it does go back. I mean, who knows how far back these things sometimes can go. If it does go back to an Indo-European thing, I can see where that even that sound in the throat that Gollum makes, that swallowing sound, that Tolkien might actually be describing the original sound, the Indo-European sound that then branched off into these different realms. That is that's a possibility. Who knows? This stuff to me is always fascinating because it ends up being, you don't really know some things, and some things you can get more concrete handle on. Like I think I was finding out that at some point human beings changed the diet when they moved from being nomads to agrarian. The diet changed the palate, and then we would be able to say certain phonetic forms that we couldn't say before. Who knows what happened? That's at some point we found something deep in the earth, and this thing, gold, somehow was related to the human body. Deep in the earth of the human body came up, and gold in the form of words became the gold that was laid out in front of people. That is in the mind of the ancient people. Again, going back to our original discussion about thinking symbolically, if the human being is the earth and the words that come out of him are the treasure, and you're having the same
word hoard,
wouldn't it be gold? All of it kind of,
which is just as we riff on this idea, it occurs to me too. There's another word. There's an ancient Syro-Phoenician word for cavern deep into a mountain. I mean, this kind of thing where he is, and there's grotto, which is where in Italian picks this up over time. Not over time, but even in ancient times, the Italic language pick up the word grotto, which is where just the generic word for cave, but it means the bowels of something. It was the bowels of the earth.
I like that. Who knows? I mean, I don't know finally, but boy, is it intriguing. And what's really intriguing to me is how a guy like Tolkien would have certainly been thinking about these connections. That's why,
as a philologist, I mean, he plays with these things all the time.
Sure. Yeah, and then as a philologist, he would have, and then as an artist, he's always thinking about these ideas that then take shape in his art. I mean, again, this is something which is kind of hard to convey to students that I teach about children. An artist doesn't just sit down and throw paint at a wall. We aren't all Jackson Pollock. Frequently an artist who's worthwhile thinks through all this stuff that he puts in, and it just meticulous detail. My kids were looking at a Hieronymus Bosch painting the other day, and they were just marveling that, Hieronymus Bosch, he was a nutball, but he would paint these little scenes that nobody would hardly ever see in the corner of one of his paintings, and he'd have like a guy eating a sandwich with another fellow inside the sandwich or something, and it's like, why would you go
there? Sticking out. Just to draw me a picture, I mean, level of detail.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so I suppose if we were to do our duty, I mean, this is great to talk about the linguistic aspect, but I suppose if we were to actually talk about the chapter we're supposed to talk about.
Right, let's get into Beorn.
Okay, so here we are. This is chapter 7, and queer lodgings. And I don't know, Cameron, what do you think? Maybe I'll edit this out later, but do we need to actually even go over that first word at all in the title of the chapter? Do we need to make anything clear about that first word, given our current situation?
In my experience teaching, and I'm sure it's echoed in your own, it's probably worth bringing some clarity. Especially what's become popular now, I guess, in certain circles of Tolkien commentary to reread, to really eisegetically read partisan Leninist philosophy into Tolkien, which is just as unwarranted as the early communists tried to read fascism into it. It was stupid on both counts. But yeah, the word queer, it means strange, but not only strange, right? I mean, there's the way that Tolkien talks about the word queer is also fey. I mean, that's his modern translation of the concept of fey. Could you explain that a little bit? Flesh that out? I don't have a good way of putting words to that. It's not just it's not just strange that they're in a bear's house. There's some other quality to it.
The way that I've understood the word fey, anyway, is that you are slightly in the world of the elvish, slightly in the world of the magical. If someone is described as fey, they're not insane, but they're off kilter from what we consider to be normal, straight-laced bourgeois conduct. And that's,
they're touched in some way.
They're touched in a certain way.
Okay.
It was a word which I think was far more familiar to people in earlier generations when we had more contact with the earth. We had more contact with the fickleness of health and of the seasons. Now with our insular worlds, I don't think we reckon with the idea that some people can be a little bit off, not evil, not insane. They're not like going to Walmart in their underwear or something. But just a little.
It's just normal though, right?
Yeah. Well, that's normal. Yeah. But they're just a little odd. That's fey, as far as I understand it. But fey always had the connection to visionariness. Like, if you were fey, yeah, you were a little odd, but you were very worthwhile keeping in the community, because it was the fey person who had this connection to the spiritual and divine realm that could have insight and could lead the community when the community didn't always see clearly where it should be going. One thing to consider is that ancient world people prior to the mechanized world, they didn't just believe in heaven and hell. Okay, this is something, again, I find startling I don't know why I do, but I find startling in a lot of people I talk to. There's heaven, there's earth, there's hell. That's it, nothing else. And so for them, things like ghosts or magical creatures or other worldly creatures that are ambivalent towards humans, they don't exist at all. There's none of that. But people prior to the mechanized world, they held that there was another world, almost like a parallel universe to ours, that erupted into our world at certain times of the year, more than they did otherwise. So like at the equinox and at the solstice, those were times of opening up of those worlds to our world. The feast of, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but the feast of Shaman that happened there in the fall equinox.
Samhain, yes.
Okay.
In the Celtic worlds, yeah.
that was a prime example of this opening up this otherworldliness where the dark spirit of our world. The converse was true with the feast of Easter that occurred in the spring equinox, because the world of the bright spirits would empty into our world at that time. And so you had this crossover, bleeding over of the two. And people that still clung to that was seen as fools, these April fools. But folks that had the sense of being fae were far more aware of those oddities and odd places and nodal points on the earth where we made more contact with the other world, and they were very careful not to tread too hard on the graves of those deities.
Right. So that's somebody whose fae is touched by. I mean, they somehow are living in some portion in both worlds, in this world and in the world of the otherworldly.
Yeah.
Right. Somehow they're living on the edge, on the fringe, the borderlands, in some way, you might say, or they're living in both. Somehow they exist between both.
Yeah, and it's
because of that they've got a connection. They're able to see, they're able to hear, and thus potentially give warning of the presence of evil spirits or something that's going to happen, because they're connected to this atemporal or outside of our world kind of stuff.
It's like the fire spotters today, the people that sit around looking for tornadoes. Similar thing. They would look at spiritual tornadoes and spiritual fires, and they'd be aware when it was going to happen. Sometimes they were listened to, and sometimes, like Cassandra, they were ignored to the peril of the city. Right. So those people were very valuable. I mean, even I know that in the American Indian culture, it was a special rank, if you will, or a special role that the person who was fae fulfilled. And he intentionally did things backwards. He rode his horse backwards, and he washed with sand.
Oh, sure.
Left outside of his teepee, and he painted himself a certain way. So, but he did those as rituals in order to focus on the fact that this was his job, was to see the other world. So anyway, this word is a dynamite keg these days, and unfortunately, we have to reckon. We have to reckon with the fact that words change meaning over time. Many of them do, and they alter. They have things attached to them, either consciously or unconsciously, and that's what happened here. In its original form,
I think that's.
Well, sorry, let me just finish the idea. But in its original form, this word meant more like things juxtaposed to each other. So if you were queer or queer, you were at an angle to something else. You were cross to it or oblique to it. You weren't true. Okay, so true was always not opposed to, but true was always in relationship to queer. Okay, so queer and true were the two modes of living, so to speak, or the modes of construction. True meant you were in line. Okay, we have problems with truth these days too, so it's no doubt that we would have problems with queer. True meant you were in line with whatever you were trying to create or whatever was trying to be built. Queer meant that you were oblique to whatever was trying to be built.
A little off kilter.
A little off kilter, right, exactly.
Right.
So here we're talking queer in the sense of this is off kilter. Something's off, something's odd. It's like that moment where you suddenly see your breath, where it's a 90-degree day and suddenly you see your breath and there's a ghost somewhere, or the hairs on your arm stand up and something's about to happen. You get that spooky music. Dun, 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 dun,
it's a queer feeling. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. How it got appropriated and why it got appropriated and why it got used in the way it does now, that's a different story, and a long one. I don't know if we need to go into detail about it.
No, I think we would get lost in philology land again, but queer lodgings. In this case.
Yeah. Odd.
Yeah, something odd.
Odd lodging.
Odd and somewhat otherworldly.
And the question would be then, in what way are they odd? Because we have two sections here, but we have the section of the Eagles, which is a shorter section, and the section of Beorn.
Right. Because it's Lodgings.
Set that aside. Set Beorn aside for a minute. How are the eagles odd? How are they strange? How are they fey? What is queer about that?
That's interesting.
What do you think?
I like that. So we've got two lodgings. Two lodgingses, like hobbits is, right? There's lodgingses in the chapter. He's with the eagles,
right?
On this, I mean, really is. It's alleged. It's off kilter. It literally is queer in the original sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of torqued off the side of the mountain, and Bilbo is a rabbit. He's right. We're repeatedly reminded he's rabbit-ish.
Yes.
In the clutches of an eagle, except instead of in the clutches of the eagle, everything's queer. He's riding on the back of the eagle. Mm-hmm. And he's sitting up there, and they're eating up there, where no hobbit, because hobbits don't like to live above ground. They live on the ground floor. If they have, even if they have an upper floor, they still sleep on the ground floor. They're ground dwellers, like rabbits. But here's one up in the air, pinned to the edge of, off the edge of a cliff. That sounds pretty queer.
So he's out of his element, and for him, for his perspective, this is strange. It's odd. It's like he is the bacon in the frying pan.
Right, except oddly been put back in the cupboard, as he says, right?
That's right. Yeah, right. And he wakes up at the very beginning of this. He wakes up and he has this vision of the domestic realm that he longs for at the beginning of the book. Here's the line. It says, "He sat down and wished in vain for a wash and a brush. He did not get either, nor tea, nor toast, nor bacon for his breakfast, only cold mutton and rabbit. And after that, he had to get ready for a fresh start." Okay, so he longs for that domestic realm where he could wake up and go down to the icebox, as my English friend says, not refrigerator, right? Side note, Americans have refrigerators, Europeans have iceboxes. The refrigerator stores a ton of food, the icebox stores a few things. But he'd go down to the icebox and he would get out, the cold mutton and the bacon and whatever it was and have a nice breakfast. He wakes up, it's not there. There's none of that there. So he's out of his element already. And then, he's picked up by the eagle and put on the back of the eagle, and that's strange. And then the eagles talk, and that's strange. And they even have this little tete-a-tete with Gandalf after they drop him off at the top of the rock. So it's the whole thing is a little strange, a little off.
Especially when this other thing too that just struck me here is that the eagles are, and this is again why you don't ride the eagles into Mordor, is the eagles are they're divine. Like they belong to Zeus, right? They're god, and that's made explicit in the Silmarillion. They are the creatures of, is it Manwë? I think one of these, right? That the chief guy, chief of the Valar, and so that it's very strange that they should be playing pony for this troop of fools who don't belong anywhere here. They're totally out of their element. Yeah. And so there's a sense of divine intervention, but there's also this, things are kind of backwards about it. Things are upside down.
Yep.
In a sort of way.
Yes, and the divine element is very obvious in the way that the eagles speak. The eagles
they're majestic.
They're majestic, and they speak in a very elevated way. And there's even a line in here where the eagle says to Bilbo, it's a crystal clear day. What would be better than flying? Like this is what we do. We fly.
Right.
And for him, I get a vision of some guy standing on the prow of the ship with the wind blowing in his hair. This is what we do. This is this heroic thing that we do all the time. Why would you complain? What more would there be for anybody?
Right.
It's for a guy who is earthbound, travel on the sea is a nightmare, right? Because it's it's the open, terrifying. For a mariner, travel on the sea is like, that's delightful. That's the thing you do. And you learn how to be a mariner, and you learn how to navigate the waters. Same thing with the air, the third element. For people on the ground, the air is normally a place that you don't go. But for who fly, that's a realm of beauty and majesty, and they love being up there. Oh, it's something to consider. I just thought of this. If he's writing this too in the 1930s, there was no real commercial jetliner system at the time. In fact, the airplane was still relatively young. So, and ballooning had started in the 1800s, I think, but even that was relatively young. So human beings didn't go up in the air at all.
It
So
was very strange to do so.
very strange to do so. So, and even now for us, it's more tedium than anything because it's all the checkpoints and having to get through.
And you're in this giant tin thing. You're not in the open air. You're not even like those old the early biplanes, where your face, you got to have those goggles because your face is, you're out there.
Yeah. It's highly unsexy these days. It's like, you just do it because you have to do it. But at the time, it would have been this almost impossible thing for the common guy. And it would have been something where if you did it, it would be really kind of thrilling. But it would be odd. It'd be strange. It'd be an experience which you would do maybe once or twice in your lifetime at the most. And it would change your perspective. I remember seeing some of those early photographs that were done during the war from an airplane and how they totally changed the way that they did battle, the way they saw the landscape. And this had already been starting with the ballooning. We granted, because now we have satellites and airplanes and all this jazz. At the time, maps were made by people on the ground. And when the balloons went up in the early 1800s, and then when the airplanes went up, the detail you could get through photography and through that aerial perspective changed the way we saw the Earth. Like the photographs of the Earth from the moon, there was a similar change. People had never thought that the Earth looked the way that it actually looked. And so it really altered how we behaved as a culture. I think that for the experience of being up there in the air with the eagles and on the cliff with the eagles, it is a queer moment. It is a fey moment. You are liminal. You were at that realm, as you said, the borderlands between heaven and earth, and you're experiencing it before. But it changes. No longer can you go back to your hobbit hole and talk about dirt with the other hobbits.
You've been in the heavens. You've been in the lower heavens.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you've been in the. Sure, we could talk about dirt, but I know something more than dirt. I've been there. I've seen it. So I think it's a transformative experience for him to have been lifted up first off by the eagles last time, but then in this chapter, just to have that experience of talking with them and seeing how they live, what could be finer than flying. And of course, as you've mentioned, to get an experience, a first-hand experience of that divine nature which the eagles represent, like the eagle on the top of Yggdrasil, like climbing up Yggdrasil and talking to the eagle up there at the top. And then running down like Ratatosk back down to your own realm. So I can see now that realm I can see as odd, as fey, as queer. We go to the other realm, which is the realm of Beorn, and he's not an earth spirit, but he's more earthy than the eagles, right? My son,
but he's a wild man.
Yeah, he's a wild man. Yeah. A solitary wild man. My son found out that there's a difference between lycanthropy and werewolves. We had an discussion about that the other night. And I don't know if it's a legitimate distinction or not, but werewolves are at the mercy of the moon. They're cursed. They can't help but change. Lycanthropes are skin changers, are people that can change back and forth from wolf to man when they wish, when they want to. So Beorn is more of this guy, as we find out during the course of this section. He's
under no enchantment but his own.
Enchantment but his own, exactly. And in order to enter into that section, because we don't find out immediately that's what he is, in order to enter that, we have a scene which is really, I think you mentioned this before, it's a reboot of chapter 1, right?
Yes.
So here we have the solitary man living in his beautiful house surrounded by flowers, and
that's right,
is invaded by dwarves and a wizard and a hobbit.
Right.
But this time they're invaded in a different way, because Gandalf has apparently learned his lesson, and so he has them come in 2 by 2, telling us to draw him in, which is a wonderful image of how art works, right? But get into this discussion with Beorn, and Beorn invites them all into his house, and he's very skeptical that this is real, that they're actually what they say they are. But they come in and then he entertains them, and then he goes out and he goes out to check their story. And this passage here has always startled me, because even when I was a kid, and I read about this, this was one which kind of spooked me. It was odd. It was queer. Bilbo is at night hearing scufflings around the lodge, and he wakes in the morning, and he finds a wolf skin that has been hung up, and the head of a goblin on a post. And to me, it was kind of spooky. But then Beorn comes out and he slaps him on the back and says, this is, we're all good. We're all friends now. Because he checked out their story. And it always struck me as strange and peculiar and a little terrifying, because this is the point where you realize that the world of the Fae, the world of the otherworldly liminal realm, is not always sweet and nice and cute. Sometimes it's a really dangerous characters. Like this guy, Beorn, right? He is not a nice guy. He's
not safe.
He's not safe. No.
Yeah.
He is one that that when he's your friend, it's good, and when he's not your friend, it's terrifying. It's like, what's that movie, The Revenant? Right. That's not a nice bear. It's not a big and strong, Did you ever see the movie Grizzly Man?
No gentle Ben.
No.
What was that?
Did you ever see the movie Grizzly Man?
Grizzly Man, no. The old Grizzly Adams show, I know.
I grew up with Grizzly Adams. That was nice. Yeah. He had a big.
I always wanted to be that. That seemed like a good life to me.
Yeah. Well, Grizzly Man was about a guy who really was crazy. It was a Werner Herzog movie, and this guy goes out to live.
Oh, weird.
He goes out to live with grizzly bears because he thinks he can tame them, and it turns out he's wrong. And it's a documentary movie. I'm assuming real documentary, like Zasho footage. But this poor guy, he was Fey. That was a guy who was definitely Fey. And he just didn't fit into society at all. But he thought he could go out and commune with bears. And he would go out and he would actually get 2 or 3 feet away from these grizzlies. He actually slaps one on the nose once. And it's terrifying to watch, because, this guy he's going to die. And then he does, not to give away.
Surprise. Slap a grizzly on the nose and somebody does.
But it's such a reminder that the world of nature, we think we've tamed it. And there's no point where we can say, oh, we've conquered nature, because nature is always going to be a little bit risky. And the realm of Fae is always going to be a little bit dangerous. I think Tolkien is tapping into that in this image of Beorn.
Right.
And at the same time, it's also the most fairy tale-ish point of the fairy tale we're reading, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, they come in. The whole household is wild. I mean, not only is it this sort of Nordic log hall, the way that it's laid out, very charming. But the company comes in, and they're waited upon by sheep and dogs, ewes and rams. And so these creatures imbued with the livestock creatures of all things, imbued with sentient life, they don't communicate. It doesn't seem they communicate with the Hobbit or the dwarves, Gandalf, but they know their task, but they otherwise behave like, I mean, in the same way you wouldn't necessarily expect servants to communicate with the guests, in a certain way, but they come in, they know their task, and they do it, and they're the servants, but they're animals.
Yes.
This is thoroughly strange.
It reminds me of that image out of the story of Baba Yaga, where Vasilisa goes to get the fire from Baba Yaga, and the hands come out of nowhere. And these pairs of hands are serving them. And Baba Yaga says, "You're right not to ask me where the hands come from." Baba Yaga says she's a spirit of the forest. She's a witch of the forest. And something, world of the Fae. Yeah, right. There's some things you better not ask about. It's
best not to ask. Right. Like, what's in the haggis? You're right not to ask.
I should see it. That podcast is actually very good. But yeah, it's that scene of those animals coming out again. It's very story-like. It's like the images of that you see of Snow White and all of her little animal buddies cleaning up the cottage and all.
Right.
In fact, the image of Beorn ties back to certain fairy tales that I remember from reading as a kid. There was one called Snow White and Rose Red.
Yes, that's right.
Where there's a dwarf that gets his beard stuck in a log, and the girls try to help him. They cut off his beard. He gets all mad, and then he tries to hurt them, but the bear comes out of nowhere and smacks the dwarf around, kills him.
Yeah, the bear totem is a powerful.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like that image. The bear ends up being a prince that's had a curse on him, and he changes into a bear. And I think the story actually is connected to another one where it's like a Cupid and Psyche story, where she marries the prince, but then she fires into his life, and he's cursed to stay as a bear, and she has to go find him, etc., etc., etc. It's a very Cupid and Psyche image that goes on in that story.
Yeah, that one in fact is in the Blue Fairy book by Andrew Lang. Yes.
Yeah.
And was with which Tolkien was very, very familiar.
Oh yeah.
Enough to praise and critique Lang on those points.
There's another one I found, which let's see here. It's called the White Bear King Valemon. Okay, and it's kind of a version of Snow White and Rose Red, but it's another story where the bear is a white bear, and he is a prince that's cursed to be a white bear, and her love for him eventually breaks the spell. And there's more to it, of course, than that. But it's one of those Danish stories, Norwegian stories. So it would have been in that realm that Tolkien was familiar with and loved and studying.
Right.
There's an interesting point I found, that the name itself of Beorn is not his first choice, though. Tolkien originally wanted to name this character Medved, which is Russian.
Honey.
Russian. Well, it is honey, but it's also Russian for bear, because the bear seeks. So the two were
honey eater,
right? The Medved, exactly. Yeah. And so he was going to name this character Medved, like Michael Medved, but he named him Beorn instead, because Beorn is Norwegian and Medved is Russian. So he changed his mind. But in the early drafts, it's Medved, which kind of gives a kick to our earlier conversation. Did he know Russian?
To the familiarity of Slavic literature and folklore.
I don't know.
Which, of course, which the bear features prominently as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because so Medved, which of course means honey eater, which is a kenning for bear, but Beorn, what is it? In Tolkien's version. Okay, so we go deep for a second here. Tolkien's translation of Beowulf. He translates Beowulf, and not only does he translate Beowulf, which is the best translation of Beowulf that I've found, that I'm aware of, I should say. I can't claim to have found it, right? But that I'm aware of. He also, and many people are not aware of the fact that Tolkien then, as a good, fun-loving philologist would want to do, goes to try and recreate the proto-story that would have what was the original fairy tale fable that existed, that was the raw material that evolved over centuries into Beowulf.
Yeah.
And so he recreates his story, and he names, and he has his Beowulf, his original Beowulf is, and as if I understand it right, he recreated a projected, an invented, possible original backstory in Anglo-Saxon, in Old English, and then translated it into modern English. So he goes through the whole sort of exercise and the whole process. And his original Beowulf, he gives the etymology within the story then of Beowulf. He was raised by bears, and the kenning for bears in this context is Beowulf. Wolf in this case meaning broadly a wild, savage animal.
Yeah.
That, of course, eats the, is with the beehives, Beowulf. And so there's plausible then that Beorn is in fact then some version or variant of that as well.
I like that. No, I like that very much. The story about Beowulf is a wonderful story. I think I first heard that at the History of the English Language podcast. But that hunter for bees, which is actually a hunter for honey, as a kenning for bear, it works so well. It works so well.
Yeah.
And to have Beorn be a version of that works really well too.
Yeah.
You can speak better to this than I can, but as somebody who knows different languages, you see connections between these words, and you start to realize that these cultures that we have distinguished, that these are Swedes, these are Russians, these are French, they have words that come down over the generations that actually are the same word in different forms, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Tolkien, who would have been doing the same thing and studying all these languages, would have said, well, what are we going to name the guy? We name him according to the idiom we want. Do we want the Russian idiom? Do we want the North? But one way or the other, he ends up naming the guy in such a way that he's a bear, sure, but he's also connected to all these other things, the Beowulf and the Medved and the skin changer, all packed into that image. That's really great. That's really great. What do you make of the connection though between Bilbo and Beorn? Because I think it's a really good one, but it's not the man Hobbit. It's the big man, the big bear man.
It's not the little rabbit man. It's not Bilbo the bourgeois bunny dragon living in his hoard. There's nothing dragonish about Beorn per se, except of course that he's dangerous. But that's that's it. It's a similarity, but it's not like a connection. But we've got, so instead of a small diminutive figure who's content with his bourgeois life, you've got Grizzly Adams, this wild man. You've got the wild man. You've got the green man, the man of the forest, the wild creature man thing, who is fey in and of himself, insofar as he is both man and fairy, insofar as he's got this enchantment, this dual nature, and he lives surrounded by animals. So we have a sense like that's his. There's this deeper connect. He's got a more familiar connection with the beasts of the forest, and the beasts of the field. Right, they're the ones he communes with. This is his tribe. These are his people. And so he's more animal than man in that way. And we've got this and we're cued off to the comparison between the two. We've got this interesting juxtaposition. When we see him, we're given a physical description. He's got sinewy muscles, right? He's wearing this low cut, or not a low cut, what do you say, like a tunic that goes just to mid-thigh kind of thing. And then we're sure that he's so huge that Bilbo could have passed between his legs without bothering to duck to avoid the fringes of his tunic. Right. So this guy's big, but that visual image Tolkien gives us, we picture the one as the one is the macro man, right? The big, Beorn is the big one, and then we see the homunculus Bilbo sort of standing beneath his loins, and that there's a generative there's a connection on multiple levels, both in terms of generation, both in terms of being the inner man and the outer man, the old man, the new man, the tame, the epitome of the tame man, Bilbo the bourgeois bunny, and the epitome of the wild man. So there's a juxtaposition, the one superimposed upon the other. Only as a visual image that's given us. It's a beautiful, artistic. It's a beautiful spell that Tolkien does in this as the author, a literary device to have us picture that without that actually happening in the scene.
So in some ways, Bilbo in this instance becomes the child looking up to the grown man that he needs to become himself.
Right. There's the element, you need to become more wild. And the wild man isn't just the regular wild man who lives in the forest. He also has this really well-appointed aristocratic domesticity. But it's aristocratic domesticity. It's not the comfortable bourgeois life that Bilbo has in the hill, but it's this aristocratic great hall, the great kings of old, you know, and we should immediately feel a connection to Heorot in the way that this hall is, you know, sort of laid out for us. And because then the servants come in and wait upon them. The servants, the lamb, the sheep that come in, the dogs that come in, so these different ranks of servants, the servants and the footmen, if you will, that kind of thing. You know, they come in from the kitchen that we're not told about, right? There's this upstairs, downstairs. Like they're over there, and this is where we are. But they come in and they serve all this food, and we're talking. We even hear about of course, this is all the whole frame, the meta frame for the whole story is, of course, that this comes from Bilbo's own recounting later on, right? And so meticulous attention to the food and the cutlery. You know, we're told about the plates, the bowls, the knives, the forks, no metal, right? Nothing made of metal. It's all wood.
Yes. Which is the way
these more natural materials.
Yeah. And people in the medieval age would have eaten with that anyway, unless they were royalty. But as a kid, I never thought about some of the details you think about as an adult. I was always amazed at deer, especially carrying plates. I thought that was so cool. It reminded me Christmas, Christmas imagery that we have. We have these animals with like candelabra on their backs, And that's so cool, these brass things. As an adult, of course, you could ask the question, who's making all the food? I mean, is there like a monkey back there with opposable thumbs? That's right. But then you run up to Tolkien's response again, which is basically just shut up.
You're right not to ask where the food comes from.
Where that came from. It's a non-question. But you're right.
Because it's fairy. You don't ask when the fairy queen comes out of the cottage and serves you. You don't ask where she got that. That would be just ultimately bad form. Right?
Yes.
You're just grateful for it.
Yep. And it breaks the spell, and it makes you
they disappear.
Incapable of receiving the silver star in the middle of the cake, to use the example of the Wooten Major in his other story. The person who is always trying to look for the mechanical answer to things is going to miss if I can mix my metaphors, miss the grail when it's right in front of him. He's not going to
And that's what this is like. This is like the grail procession that Percival sees. The banquet's there, and I mean it's not that, but there's elements there's a familiarity there to this.
In the same way that the Grail procession is a moment when the Fey world, the queer world, bursts through into our world, and we have that moment of Esther, which is a resurrection image, or the moment of Chavan, which is a descent into Hades image. We have that moment when we suddenly realize there's a lot more to this universe than is conceived of in our philosophy.
That's right, Horatio.
That image of those creatures coming out too, it reminds me of, like I said, Christmas, when we parade out all these beautiful things and all these mysteries, and we talk about things like elves, jolly old elves coming to these and impossible things. Why not rejoice in that? Why not just enjoy that? Why not just have the good food? Why does one have to ask the question of how does a fat man get down your chimney?
Right.
How do the deer make the bread? It's a stupid question.
It's a stupid question. Don't ask that.
Don't ask.
And actually, that's interesting you point that again. So just putting things together, the wild man and the banquet and the Christmassiness of it, that you're making that connection here. There's another Christmas banquet where a jolly old elf comes in and he's all green and he challenges someone to anybody to a battle, right? This is the Gawain and the Green Knight, right? All of this is kind of packed into the cultural memory and the associations. It's one of those kinds of things, right? We're not saying this is that, this is the other thing, but it's of that order, right?
Right. Now I'm going to speculate here for a minute. This is something I've not researched a lot about, but I'm wondering whether Tolkien isn't thinking in the back of his mind something that William Butler Yeats writes about in a poem called The Circus Animals, I think. I don't remember the poem as well as I. But in that poem, he talks about how the circus animals break free and he can't control them. And what he's getting at is the attempt to make drama work, and therefore the attempt to make words on the stage. The point being is drama is a form of magic. And you are presenting an image there to people and moving them so that they are moved to tears or fear or laughter. But it's all fakery, right? It's not real. In the same way, words are also that way. When you look at a word on a page, like I'm looking at any word here, horses, right? The words on the page is just a collection of pixels or ink. It's just shapes on a page. Yet the shapes on the page constitute what we call letters. They represent sounds. The sounds put together represent a single sound that is representative of an idea or an object. And if we delve too deeply behind that curtain, if we delve too deeply behind trying to find the reality there, we actually miss the point that we're talking about something which has four legs and rides across the plain and you can ride it. You know, when I say horse, if I say that there's nothing there, it's just a word. We end up in a universe like Hamlet does, where he says, I'm studying words, 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 but there's nothing behind it. And it's just, that is another form of madness. You know, talk about madness. It's another form of madness where you have tried to get to the kernel of things in the wrong way. You've asked the wrong question. And so you end up digging and digging and digging until you get to a molecular level, a subatomic level. And at that subatomic level, you find that no particle is actually connected to any other particle. And so really, matter shouldn't hold together at all. But if you've been looking in that direction, you've missed the point. Because the point is that there's your child right in front of you, or there's your beloved right in front of you, or there's your garden right in front of you. It's not, you're not looking for molecules when you're leaning in for a kiss, you know?
Right.
It's not like you need to pull you don't need to dissect the dove in order to find out what the truth of that bird is. Because when you do, you have a pile of guts. You don't have the dove itself anymore. So I guess
that's what makes it magic, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going. You're on a.
And here is that it's queer in the sense that you don't know the origin of the thing, and it has all those connections to the Fey world. And Bilbo is in a way wanting to ask certain questions, but Gandalf even stops him at some point, right? He stops him from taking a certain route intellectually. He says, no, that's not what you should be asking.
Which is, again, like Percival, right? Like, don't ask, don't reveal the idiot that you are, and don't anger the bear. Don't poke the bear.
I'm a bad boy. If, for instance, you ask certain questions, you have to find the right questions to ask. You don't ask, who makes the bread back in the kitchen. You know, you don't ask the question where the hands come from Baba Yaga. You don't have to ask the question of what makes the Grail procession work, because that's the wrong question. You end up a little bit insane then. You end up like the Monty Python foolery, you know, where they deal with literally they deal with these things in the Holy Grail. Here's the passage, if I can. Here's the passage. Gandalf
please
stops him, and he says, Gandalf is trying to explain what is happening with Beorn. And it says, is that the person you are talking to us now? You're taking us to now, they said. Couldn't you find someone more easy-tempered? Hadn't you better explain it all a bit clearer, they say, and so on. Yes, and certainly is. No, I could not, and I was explaining very carefully, answered the wizard crossly. If you must know more, his name is Beorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin changer. And Bilbo gets scared, right? Because a skin changer means something for him. What? A furrier? A man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels? Asked Bilbo. Is he that kind of guy that like takes the skin off creatures like rabbits? Because, you know, I'm kind of like a rabbit. And then
taxidermist, right?
A taxidermist. And Gandalf says, good gracious heavens, no. Oh, no. Don't be a fool, right? If you can help it.
Help it.
And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier again as long as you're within 100 miles of his house, nor rug, cape, tippet, muff, or any other such unfortunate word. He's a skin changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he is a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great, strong, black-haired man with huge arms and a great beard. I can't tell you much more than that. Right? And I love that Gandalf, who knows what he is, says, "You're asking the wrong question. Don't ask your question out of fear. Don't ask your question in a mechanical way, because that's not what we're talking about. And don't mention those words." That's wonderful.
The forbidden words.
Yeah, forbidden words. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It really is. Because that's the essence of the magic we're talking about in literature and drama. You know, the guy who's in the middle of the play and says, you know, that's not possible. Well, you've missed the point in the play. You have not willfully suspended disbelief, as Coleridge talked about.
Yeah.
Well,
or
mechanical answer.
As Tolkien, and this is, you know, Tolkien's whole point one of his points on fairy stories is precisely this: the ability to enter into a secondary world, which doesn't require the suspension of belief, but rather able to believe in a secondary sense, to become enchanted.
Yeah, to become enchanted yourself. You have to dance. You have to dance with the Fae folk.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, where are you going after this? You gonna hang out at a bar? Yeah, that's right. And in any work of art or in any piece of music, you kind of have to enter into that mentality, right? You have to enter into it and say, okay, give this a try. I'm not going to say, well, it's just air blowing through a tube when I'm listening to Gabrielli or Handel or whatever. Just air blowing through a tube, because then you lose it. It's fun. I was always struck by the idea of Orpheus in the ancient world, where he goes to save Eurydice out of the underworld. Now, what does that whole myth mean? And I think it really is an example of artwork itself. Artwork is a remembering. That is, it takes the members that are split apart and it reconstitutes them, brings them back together. So when, like Tolkien, he takes different pieces from Norse and from Slavic and from French art, English art, and he pulls them together into something new. He remembers them. And in our talk and thinking about these things, we are remembering that these have connections much deeper than Tolkien. Right. The trick is that Orpheus makes that mistake at the end. He turns around to try and confirm with his eyes that what he is doing is, and what happens? She's gone, right? Eurydice disappears. Yeah. And it's sad and melancholy, but it's a really great cautionary tale.
Yeah. And actually the Old English version of this story, which Tolkien also translated, it highlights that dismembering and remembering part much more strongly. If I recall correctly, it actually includes elements of somebody being chopped to pieces.
Yes. Yes.
And that Orfeo. For those who are interested, it's that and his translation of Beowulf and a few other things are bound together in a copy that's available. I don't know, what the official title is, but it's in those stories there.
I mean, that image of remembering goes further back than Orpheus, of course, because Osiris was right. When Isis and Osiris are married, and Osiris gets torn apart by his brother Seth. I want to say Seth. And his pieces get scattered, and Isis draws them back together and puts them back together and wraps them up in linen cloth, and he reconstitutes. And then he rises again to become the god Ra, the sun god, the solar deity. So it's a remembering there. But again, I think even that is an example of artwork. The image of the Isis and Osiris story is really getting at the heart of what a human being does. and this is right now, Cameron. So it's at the heart of what a human being does. We are not creatures that are here to make money. We are not creatures that are here to make buildings. We are not creatures that are here to make war against each other. What humans do, different from any other animal, is that we remember our past and our beloveds and our fallen ones through the nature of art. Through the vehicle of artwork, we remember those things that otherwise are forgotten. Otherwise,
bring them together.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so Tolkien is in this, and it's not accidental that we have just gone through a death and rebirth chapter.
Exactly.
If I may. When Bilbo goes down into Gollum's realm, he dies. Okay, that, I mean, not literally, obviously, but that's a metaphor for death. He goes down into the dark. He meets his other self in a hell-like situation. He gets out again back into the light. He's carried up from almost near death in the fire, like being purged in the fire or something. And he's brought high by the eagles, by the
up into the mountain. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is itself a resurrection image.
And they cross the waters. Then there's a baptism as they descend from the Carrock, pass through the waters to arrive then ultimately at Beorn's.
Yeah, why? That's an interesting point. If I could just touch on it for a minute, why do the Eagles drop him off there? Why don't they just take him to the? Don't say shut up like the way Tolkien would. Why take him directly? You know, why do they drop him off at the Carrock?
Exactly, because it's we're given very clear the eagle. Guy here gives Gandalf very clear parameters of where we will not go, right near the habitations of men, where they would shoot us with their longbows for fear that we're stealing their sheep, which is true. But there's no reason why they couldn't take them to Beorn's house. I mean, they're animals. It's the animal play. Like it would be okay. But you're right. They dropped them off on the Carrock. They dropped them off on the big rock thing, a crag, and then so we get this sort of ancient world etymology of the Gaelic word as well from Beorn, the protogenitor of the North people. Why do they drop them off on a rock? I mean, and it's not just a rock; it's a rock that juts that rises up from flowing waters, right? Such that in order to leave the rock, you have to pass through the waters.
Yeah. I think that's what we're dealing with there. It's not, and this is the same reason why Tolkien told people asking about the Eagles, told them to shut up. What we're asking was a mechanical question. They're not asking an artistic, symbolic question. Because the question to ask is not, why couldn't the Eagles fly 10 feet further, or 10 yards further and drop them off Beorn's house? The question is, what symbolic meaning is it that they drop them off at the Carrock? The moving through water, it's a baptism image. It's like the crossing of Beowulf of the waters in order to get to Herald. The Carrock itself is like that Mount Ararat after the flood.
Yeah,
it's a high place that is above the flood that symbolizes the death of the old life. And they drop them there and they give them a blessing and they fly away, and then they have to make their way to Beorn's house in this resurrection rebooting of the original chapter.
Right. Which is interesting because if we know something of Shire geography, the dwarves themselves had to cross at least over the water to get to Bilbo's house in the first place. So there's this crossing of waters, again, like the Grail story, with the crossing of waters to arrive at these major transition points.
I'll take you one step further, which I'm sure you're familiar with this. The Shire itself is located on, basically it's a peninsula, if you will, on the west. It's not peninsula, but it's jutting out further than where most of the civilizations were, which is west of the Misty Mountains. Before a certain point in the history of the Middle Earth, that would have been deep inland, because there's a huge section of land that was inundated with a flood after the fall of Numenor. So really, the Shire itself is kind of a Carrock into the waters of the original death and flood Middle Earth history.
Right.
So, did Tolkien think all that out when he wrote this the first time? I don't know if he did. He probably didn't. But I
don't know if that far, but he'd probably agree.
Yeah. And was it there in the back of his imagination? I think absolutely. I think he was already that image of death and resurrection and the waters being the baptismal waters that send you into the underworld. I think he's already thinking through all that stuff.
And so they had to land on the Carrock because they had to pass through the waters, because you get this initiation that has to happen. You're leveling up. You're going further along. You're about to really enter the wild now.
Yes. And you're going to experience an image of what, for Bilbo, going to enter into an experience of the image of what you should become, which is this man, this wild man, this independent man, powerful, and changes his skin.
Exactly.
that whole
It's not without meaning.
that connection to the berserkers, for instance, is obviously there, the berserker thing in the Norse mythology. But the connection also to somebody who at will can change into something powerful is also there.
Yeah.
We use the phrase even now, change your skin, which means to change your life, to alter yourself, to make yourself better, to uh, move away from a life that is destroying you to a life that can actually help you. And that's changing your skin. We also use the term change your skin as in somebody who is capable of doing something unusual to their normal self. You know, if you're normally seen to be sort of an average person, but then you are just like a behemoth when you were out on the football field or you're, you know, on the rugby field or whatever. That's changing your skin. And Bilbo really has to start doing that or learn how to do that if he is going to become more than he was before. If he's going to become the dragon. It's something which the magic of this story, it's so powerful as a story because it really speaks to what every reader has to come to grips with. Are you going to be that little mousy rabbit? Or are you going to find in yourself somehow the ability to confront your doppelganger and that ability to soar high and that ability to become the skin changer you need to be?
Right.
Powerful stuff.
Exactly right. It is. There's one element of this chapter that I want to be sure that we don't miss, that we don't overlook, and that is the recurrence of a song. They sing in this chapter again. So this is now the second song of the dwarves. Second of essentially effectively the second of three songs of the dwarves.
Right.
So far we've had the dwarves sing at Bilbo's house again. So this is the rebooting of the first chapter. So just in the same way, there he heard the song. He was falling asleep listening to Thorin in the next room singing the song, humming again the last verses of the song. And now here, we heard the elves sing, then we heard the goblins sing the perversion of the elf song, and two songs of the goblins, and now we get the second song of the dwarves. Yep. And here they are. So in the same way, in Beorn's hall, there, Gandalf, or excuse me, Beorn's gone out, or he will have gone out here. Bilbo is laying down. There they are. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged on the floor around the fire, and presently they began to sing. And like the first time, we're told some of the verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for a long while. And then proceeds the song, and I'll just read maybe the first, and then the first stanza, and
please
summarize the rest. The wind was on the withered heath, but in the forest stirred no leaf. Their shadows lay by night and day, and dark things silent crept beneath. And more of the same theme. And then there was a wind that moved from west to east. All movement in the forest ceased, but shrill and harsh across the marsh, its whistling voices were released. And then, the grasses hiss, there's smoke on the mountain, smoke was in the air. It left the world and took its flight. It, the dragon at this point, was sort of synonymous with the wind. The hot wind comes in as a dragon. And the dragon had left the world and took its flight over the wide seas of the night. The moon set sail upon the gale. The stars were fanned in leaping light. And so we're given this series of images throughout this version of the song of things are pretty, like they're over the misty mountains, gold will go and find our long forgotten gold and reclaim it, was the song they sang back at Bilbo's house. Here they're singing a song of destruction and fire and swiftly arriving wind from west to east, which seems to me not, at one and the same time, it's a recounting, it's a calling up of it's a furthering of the first song in the way that here the dragon, here's the destruction wrought by the dragon, but the dragon has a hot wind of fire that comes speeding in and engulfs everything. But also, it's not explicitly about the dragon. Like we could see the symbolism was referring to other things if we didn't know the background, if we didn't know the backstory. And is it the dragon? Is it sort of like the dragon's spirit also that can be like this? Is it beginning to possess them in some way in a little bit? There's something, it's not possessing them, but kind of a foreshadowing of, they begin to get pretty grabby, grabby handsy here. They begin to get more dragony the closer we approximate now. As they enter the dark wood into Mirkwood, right? They're gluttonous. They go through the food really fast, rather fast. Then they start to get hangry. Then they chase after the elves, cause all sort of ruckus, right? In the coming chapters here, and then they just become harder to deal with, harder to be around, right? They cause trouble that gets them locked up in prison at the Elf King's, lairs there, and of course culminating when they get to the mountain itself and the problems that are there. But there's this sense that now we're talking about something that's a spirit of the air. Right, it's not just the historic dragon Smaug. We're talking about now an elemental force. Yeah. And they're singing this song, and this is when Beorn departs. Like he doesn't care about gold. We're told he doesn't care about gold, about dwarf things, mining, crafting stuff in the sense of metalcraft. He's not into that. He doesn't care much for dwarves. And they start singing this, and he's just, I'm going to go outside. I got to go do my bear thing for a while. And he recommunes with nature, and there's a bear dance, right? These bears, we're told, shuffling around all night. So there's a regular, what do they call it? There are regular bears. Was it just a regular bears meeting? There's a word I feel like he used, and I can't think of what it is. But I mean, it's like a bear moot.
Yeah, bear moot, basically. Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. This is a really interesting point to me. First off, Tolkien's very aware of song. And this is kind of like, it's like a theme in a symphony that comes up again and then comes up again, and so it ties the thing together because you see the song coming up in different places. And we've spoken about that before. It's often been misinterpreted or poorly interpreted. I think in the movie, they really did a nice job with the singing of this song. Tolkien's poetry has often been criticized as being kind of flat and dull. But it's only flat and dull because he didn't know how to write music, and the poetry is supposed to go with music. If you hear music, you hear just how powerful this stuff really is. That's why I like what they did in the Jackson movie with the song. It harkened back to that Russian Orthodox chant style, which I think is really what he's thinking here. This style is different from the Elvish singing is far more like the troubadours, the French troubadours singing, and I can see it being done in such a way that you have lute and you have a drum and you have the fife. This is far more like the chants, the dirges, the drones that they would use in the Russian Orthodox. And it is like you said, it's a religious song. And we remember what happened when they sang it, other verses, but they sang it the first time in Bilbo's home. How it affected Bilbo, because it called up in him a dragon thing. Right. He wanted to journey. He wanted to go get the gold. He wanted to contest with dragons. So there's something in the song and the style of the music that calls up a martial spirit, a thumaltic spirit, the Greeks would say. It's kind of like the Spartans who would sing their paean as they went into battle. Not just some ditty. Not even some, it's not even some a cheerleading squad. This was a religious song that galvanized the head in the Spartans and other ancient peoples, galvanized the head to do this tremendous act. So you're absolutely right in saying that this changes the nature of the dwarves in this, if I can say, second part of the story. There are three parts to the story, I think. We've crossed the Rubicon of the first. We're now into the second.
Right. We're into the second. It's the beginning of the second. Yeah.
Dwarves are different. And you're right. They're different. They're not just more dependent on Bilbo. We see that happening. But they're also, as you said, more eager for getting their gold back, more grabby for other things that they think are due to them. In fact, you could almost say, they get more to be like the dark dwarves, the actual Noldor, or original form of the dwarves, than the nice, sweet Walt Disney dwarves that that Tolkien hated. He couldn't stand the Disney version of the dwarves. Even his dwarves at the beginning even are not like that, but they become less like that in this section, if you will. And by the way, for the record, I actually did a recording of this just recently, so I'm glad you brought it up. I think I'll tag it on to the end of this video.
Good.
Recording with the music that I composed based around the song I am a poor stranger, and I'm far, far from my home. Wayfaring
Yeah.
stranger. Yeah,
Yes.
well,
Oh yeah.
so I set it to that music. So I'll put it at the end of this so you can
Oh,
hear it.
very cool.
But
Please do. That'll be good.
I really like the point here that this is not just a reboot, it is a conjuring. Okay,
Exactly. Yes.
changes the dwarves, but Bilbo, strikingly enough, goes into a sleep right after this song. He stays for the whole song, but he goes into a sleep, and the sleep he goes into is it's like that magical sleep of Adam, or the magical sleep comes upon a character right before the transformation again, because
Right.
it's out of this when he wakes up. He's the other dwarves say, get up and all this, and he wants breakfast. But it's after this they find out Beorn has found out the truth of their story, and he is decapitated the goblin. He's taken the dwarf, or taken the wolf, and flayed it, and the dwarves are
Pelted
seeing
it.
how powerful
Yeah.
this really is. So if Beorn is what Bilbo could become or should become, I'm almost reminded of I won't say this happened. I'm almost reminded of the character that goes to sleep and then at nighttime gets up and does these amazingly powerful, horrible things, and then wakes up not knowing that he did them. It's almost like Bill goes out and kick, like I want to Spawn or something like that, or
Right. But that's that's not far out. That's interesting because it's not, he doesn't quite do that. But
yeah,
sort of, if we piece the things together, Bilbo falls asleep, and then the ideal self, Bilbo, that could be, like would not the non-Bilbo, but the could be, goes off and really fast in bear form
yeah.
goes and slays. There's a way in which Beorn now become bear spirit. In some ways, can totemistically bring with him Bilbo in the Enchanted Sleep. You know what I mean? Like there's this sense of like on a higher spiritual plane that the Hobbit himself is totemistically connected to the bear
Yeah.
spirit then that goes off and does these things, because that's what in some ways internally to him is in its potentiality is planted. The seed is planted because later on the next real sleep that we go into depth or the next enchanted sleep that he really falls into, or semi-enchanted sleep, he wakes up and there's a spider binding him right in the
Exactly.
dark forest, and he
Exactly.
slays, and so he does do that thing
Yes.
there.
Yes. Yeah.
And because already the totem has done this for him now.
Yeah. So he
That's cool. I like that.
this because the song constitutes the destruction of the old life, but it also constitutes the
Mhm.
fire that's in Bilbo. And so when Bilbo goes off and sleeps, and in the dreamlike world, Beorn goes out and kicks tail all over the goblin, kicks goblin butt, and it's Bilbo. It's like the berserker in battle. It's like the shaman who dons the totem of the animal and becomes that animal. Bilbo basically is Beorn.
Mhm.
I'm Batman. You know, the
I'd
same
rather be Beorn, but I think it's great. The same
Bruce
principle.
Bruce Wayne goes out and becomes the Batman. He
He
doesn't
changes
become.
his skin,
He changes
and
his
he
skin.
goes,
Yeah,
yeah.
he has his cream man. I mean, that would be different, right? He becomes an
Yeah,
animal. That animal
yeah,
quality, animal totem that ends up allowing him to do the things that he does that can affect change he couldn't affect if he was just a pipe smoking overeater in his home all alone, as he is at the
right.
beginning. So it is a transformational chapter where I think Bilbo he's experienced the realm of the Fae, and he has immersed himself to some degree in the realm of the Fae, and he's eaten the food of the underworld, the food of the Fae.
Eating the food of the Fae here again. Yeah,
Yeah. And so now he is becoming the skin changer himself.
in
He
fact,
changes
yeah,
his skin, and he becomes something different. Huh.
yeah.
How very, very interesting. Well,
That is
okay.
cool.
For the sake of time, we got to say that brings us to the very last thing to note on this,
It
Cameron.
is.
I love that point. That was a great point. The last thing is the final words that Gandalf gives him right before they go to Mirkwood, because they're about to go into Mirkwood, and Gandalf says, "Okay, first off, return the horses,"
Mhm.
because Beorn, right? But when they get to Mirkwood, Gandalf says, I'm not going to go with you. You have to go through. I'm not going to go with you. And they're all weeping dwarf tears, you know, and boo-hoo-hooing and all this. And Bilbo even asks, isn't there some, can we go another way? You know, do we have to go through this death-like situation? You're telling us to go into this dark abyssal wood. Do we have to go? This is a really neat passage to tag on to the end of the chapter here. It reminds me of Dante at the beginning of the Inferno, who says, isn't there another way to go besides through hell?
Do I have to go through hell?
Yeah. Virgil's like, no. What are you, insane? Let's go. Well, here, there is no Virgil. They're on their own, you know, because Gandalf has to leave. So,
Virgil's actually leaving them at this point.
Yeah, Virgil's like, okay, you know, you go to hell. Here at the very end, if you don't mind, I'm going to read this.
Please do.
Okay. First off, they're coming up to the forest, and the Hobbit groans and says, "Do we really have to go through?" Groaned the Hobbit. You know, yes, you do, says the wizard. He's very matter of fact. If you want to get to the other side, you must either go through or give up your quest, and I am not going to allow you to back out now, Mr. Baggins. I'm ashamed of you for thinking of it. You've got to look after all these dwarves for me, he laughed. Again, which is a wonderful passage, because now Bilbo is no longer the thief at the bottom rung of the food chain. He has to look after the dwarves, right? No, I didn't mean that. I meant, is there no way around? There is, sure, yeah. If you care to go 200 miles or so out of your way north, and twice that south, but you wouldn't get a safe path even then. There are no safe paths in this part of the world. Remember, you were over the edge of the wild now, and in for all sorts of fun wherever you go. Before you could get round Mirkwood in the north, you would be right among the slopes of the Grey Mountains, and they are simply stiff with goblins and hobgoblins and orcs of the worst description. Before you could get round it in the south, you would get into the land of the necromancer. We know who that is. And even you, Bilbo, won't need me to tell you tales of that black sorcerer. I don't advise you to go anywhere near the places overlooked by his dark tower. Stick to the forest track. Keep your spirits up. Hope for the best. And with a tremendous slice of luck, you may come out one day and see the long marshes lying below you. And beyond them, high in the east, the lonely mountain where dear old Smaug lives. Though I hope he's not expecting you. Gandalf's just a ray of sunshine. Point. There are no safe paths in the wild. No safe paths. That's stuck with me since I first read this book. Yeah. Way back as a wee bum. There are no safe paths. If we think that there's a path somewhere along this life that's going to be safe, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Even the path of thinking that we are at home in domestic bliss in our bourgeois world, even that is not really a safe path, right? It's just a stagnant path. Right. The path we choose. Yeah, you were going to say.
No, go ahead.
The paths that we choose are either going to take us to a realm where we have to meet dangerous goblins, or it's going to take us to a path where we have to meet a really very difficult fallen angel, like Sauron, the necromancer, or we have to go straight through the darkness of suffering and death and come out on the other end. Hopefully come out on the other end. There's no guarantee.
Maybe, with a great slice of luck, we'll arrive at the other end.
Yeah.
To finally begin the quest and the challenge.
Yeah. Then you can really face the tough part.
Right. If you're lucky. Someday.
Yeah. And I guess you can look at Gandalf here as being kind of cruel in a way, but I don't think he's cruel. I think he's more like the teacher. He's more like a professor who says, look, I can suffer this way by writing the essay, or you could suffer another way by failing the class, or you can suffer by being ignorant the rest of your life. But there's no path down that's not going to be suffering in some degree.
And I can't write the essay for you.
Can't write the essay for you. Right. It's not going to work that way.
And we find, of course, he's not just abandoning them, but he himself is going down to where he would not recommend anybody goes. He goes to face the necromancer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He and the other wizards go to drive Sauron out of that, and then Sauron goes into Mordor. But yeah, that's another piece of this intricate dialogue, the intricate narrative that he's constructing here. Gandalf doesn't just go away to smoke weed, with Radagast. Right. He goes down to do something which for him is quite the challenge, to face something akin to a Balrog. Because they aren't just, this is not just an eviction notice and Sauron getting out peacefully. It's going to be a serious battle. I don't know whether Tolkien thought that through when he wrote the passage, or whether the necromancer was just a bad wizard. I really don't know.
I don't know, but even there, the death magic sorcerer, right? The death sorcerer, you're going to go face death. I mean, that's enough, right?
Right.
But that there, no matter what, even for Gandalf, there are no safe paths.
Yeah. and really, this is why the book has so much oomph to it. It's a manly book. Because basically, as a man, now I'm speaking as a man because that's what I am. I can't say, as a woman. As a man, we have to recognize that our lives are going to be tough. And there will be moments of great joy and peace and bliss. But what we have to do is not avoid the fact that life can be tough and difficult, and there are difficult things you have to handle, and either you gird up your loins, to use the old expression, or you cower and you break and you slobber all over yourself. And I think that the second one is so undignified and so horrible and is not devoid of suffering, right? Mm-hmm. That as a man, you have to gird up your loins and do this tough thing, much as we may not like to do whatever it is. But that's what Gandalf. And that's what the whole book is kind of saying. It's like, if you're going to be the Beorn, if you're going to take on this mantle, it means you have to do the tough things.
Right.
So.
And risk much.
I think it's a good place to finish. Gandalf says goodbye, leave the path, right? Don't leave the path. And then we end with they plunged into the forest, right? So go right. It's a good place to stop, don't you think?
I agree.
Good. Cameron,
farewell wherever you fare.
Yes, indeed. Farewell wherever you fare. May the wind under your wings carry you back home to your Aries. It's been a pleasure. So once again,
a pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Lassiter.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. We'll see you in the near future.
All right. See you then.
We must go away a pray of day to see the pale enchanted wood. Wars of yore, they mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where darkness hollow. Keen and elvish